I came home from my brother's funeral to find a stranger sleeping in my bed. My daughter-in-law stood in the hallway with her arms crossed and said, "You can use the guest room. Mother needs the space." I looked at her for a long moment, then said very quietly, "No, she needs to leave. And so do you." I meant every word. I just didn't know yet how long it would take to make it real. My brother Gerald had died on a Tuesday. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that moves fast and gives you no time to argue with it. I'd driven from Nashville to Knoxville on a Thursday, stayed 3 weeks to handle the estate, the service, the sorting through 71 years of a man's accumulated life, his fishing rods, his coffee mugs, the framed photo of us as boys standing in front of our father's truck, squinting into the summer sun like we owned the whole county. I drove back to Nashville on a Saturday afternoon in November. The kind of cold gray day that makes everything feel smaller. My name is Thomas Hargrove. I'm 63 years old. I built houses for 35 years, mostly custom work in the suburbs south of the city. I retired 2 years ago when my knees finally staged a formal protest. The house on Birchwood Lane had been mine since 1991. 4 bedrooms, a workshop in the back, a porch I built by hand from reclaimed cedar. I'd raised my son Daniel there after his mother passed. 22 years since she'd gone. I'd kept every room the same way she'd liked it. I turned into the driveway at 4:40 inches the afternoon. Daniel's truck was in the driveway. So was a second car I didn't recognize. A silver sedan with a Tennessee plate I hadn't seen before. I sat for a moment, looking at the house. Something felt off. The way a structure feels wrong when you've been away and can tell before you open a door that something has shifted inside. I brought my bag in through the front door. The house smelled like a different perfume, something floral and heavy. Daniel came out of the kitchen holding a dish towel, and the way he looked at me, not surprised, just braced, told me he'd been rehearsing something. "Dad, hey, good drive back? Fine. Whose car is in my driveway? We need to talk." He set the dish towel on the counter. "Brenda's mother is here. She's been having a hard time. Her apartment lease ended. And we thought, where is she sleeping?" He didn't answer right away. I walked past him down the hallway. The master bedroom door was closed. I could hear a television behind it. The volume turned up the way older people do. I opened the door without knocking. A woman in her late 60s sat propped against my pillows in my bed, wearing a housecoat, watching a game show, a cup of tea on my nightstand. She looked at me without embarrassment, then looked at the television, then back at me. "You must be Tom," she said. I stood in the doorway of the room I had shared with my wife, the room where I had slept for 32 years, looking at this stranger who had apparently moved herself into it like checking into a hotel, and I did not say a word. I turned around and walked back to the kitchen. Daniel was still there. Brenda had appeared beside him, which told me she'd been listening from the hallway. My daughter-in-law was 38, sharp in the way that sometimes reads as efficient and sometimes reads as cold. Right now, it was cold. "Dad, just hear us out," Daniel started. "Whose name is on the mortgage satisfaction letter in my filing cabinet?" He blinked. "Yours, but whose name is on the property tax statement that came in October?" "Dad, I want to hear you say it." "Yours." He exhaled. "It's your house. We know that. But she has nowhere to go. And we thought, just for a little while, how long has she been here?" Brenda answered for him. 10 days. 10 days. I'd been gone 23. They'd had my brother's funeral to wait for. And then they'd waited. And somewhere in that window they'd decided that my absence was an opportunity. I thought about that while the game show played behind the closed door at the end of the hallway. "I want her out by Monday," I said. Brenda's expression shifted. The kind of shift that happens when someone decides they're not going to pretend anymore. "She's 68 years old, Tom. She can't stay in my bedroom. That's what she can't do." I picked up my bag from where I'd set it by the door. "I'm going to my room. She needs to move to the guest room tonight. The guest room has boxes in it from the move. Then move the boxes." Daniel followed me down the hallway. He spoke in the low, urgent voice he'd been using since he was 17 and wanted something he suspected I'd refuse. "Dad, come on. Just be reasonable. She's elderly. The master bath is easier for her." I stopped walking and turned to look at my son. He was 40 years old, broad-shouldered like I'd been at that age, with his mother's eyes. I had worked 6-day weeks to put him through school. I had watched his mother die in a hospital room and then come home and made breakfast for a 12-year-old boy who didn't understand yet what permanent meant. "Daniel," I said, "I came home from burying my brother to find a stranger in my bed. Do not ask me to be reasonable right now." I went and knocked on my own bedroom door. The woman inside, her name was Patricia. I'd learn later looked up from the game show when I opened it. I introduced myself properly, explained that I was home and needed the room, and asked if she could move her things to the guest room for the night. I kept my voice even. She wasn't the one who had put herself in my bed. Someone had put her there. She agreed without much argument, gathered a few things, and I carried her overnight bag to the guest room myself. Then I closed the master bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of grief, though there was plenty of that still moving through me. Not because of anger, though that was there too. Solid and quiet. I didn't sleep because I was thinking. I got up at 5:30 and went to the workshop. I'd built that workshop myself in 1997. 16 by 20, insulated, climate-controlled, with a pegboard wall for tools and a long workbench along the south side where the light came in clean. I kept everything organized the way I'd kept job sites organized. A place for everything. Nothing wasted. Every tool accounted for. I sat at the bench with a legal pad and wrote down everything I knew. The house deed was in my name. Sole owner since 1991. I'd paid it off in 2014 after refinancing to lower the rate. My name was on the utilities, the insurance, the property tax. Daniel and Brenda had moved in 2 years ago when Daniel's contracting business hit a rough patch. We'd never formalized anything. No lease, no rent agreement. I'd told him it was temporary, and he'd said of course. 2 years ago, I wrote down a number at the bottom of the page. 32 months of mortgage equivalent at what a comparable rental would cost in this neighborhood. It was a large number. I stared at it for a while, then circled it. At 7, I called Margaret Oakes. Margaret had been my wife Carol's closest friend for 25 years and had spent the last 15 of those as a paralegal at a real estate law firm in Brentwood. She answered on the 3rd ring, heard my voice, and said, "Tom, you're back." How was, and then stopped when she heard something in my tone. I told her what I'd come home to. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. Don't have another conversation with Daniel or Brenda today. And come to my office at 2. I'm going to have you sit down with one of our attorneys. It's Saturday. He owes me a favor. Come at 2. The law office was in a renovated Victorian on Franklin Road. The kind of building I'd have loved to work on. Original millwork intact. Floors that knew how to talk. The attorney Margaret introduced me to was named Robert Ashby. He was maybe 58, quietly dressed, with the unhurried manner of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what families did to each other. He listened without interrupting while I laid out the situation. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. "Is your name the only name on the deed and all associated documents?" "Yes." "Is there any signed agreement, written or otherwise, establishing a rental or cohabitation arrangement?" "No." He nodded, made a note. "Then you have what I'd call a textbook case for a formal eviction proceeding. Tennessee law on this is clear. They are permissive occupants. No lease, no tenancy established, which means you're entitled to issue a formal notice to vacate. Given the length of stay over a year for your son and daughter-in-law, 10 days for the mother, the notice period would be 30 days. And if they don't go, then we file for unlawful detainer in General Sessions Court. Process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks from filing if contested." I looked at the document he'd slid across the table. The Tennessee statute printed out, highlighted in 2 places. "What does this cost?" He quoted me a flat fee. Reasonable. Less than 2 months of what I'd been subsidizing without a word of acknowledgement. Draft the notice, I said. I drove home in the early dark, the city lights spreading across the basin below me. I stopped at a hardware store on the way and bought a new deadbolt for the workshop, not because I needed one, but because I needed to do something with my hands. Standing in the aisle, I also bought a small video camera, the kind people use for home security. I set it up that night to cover the front door and driveway. Then I went to the filing cabinet in the study, pulled out every relevant document, and photographed each one with my phone. Deed, mortgage payoff letter, insurance policy, utility accounts, 32 months of property tax receipts with my name printed at the top of every one. Daniel knocked on the study door around 9. Dad, can we talk? Sure. He came in, sat in the chair across from my desk the way he had as a teenager when he was in trouble, and knew it. He looked tired. Brenda's mom isn't in a position to move quickly. She doesn't have income coming in yet. If you give us a couple of months, I'm not negotiating, Daniel. I'm not asking you to negotiate. I'm asking you to have some patience. I had patience for 23 days while you rearranged my house. He looked at the wall for a moment. It's just a room, Dad. It's my room. In my house. I kept my voice level. A formal notice to vacate will be served Monday. You'll have 30 days. His expression changed the way his mother's used to when she was genuinely hurt rather than just frustrated. It landed differently when I saw it on his face. You're serious? I am. He stood up. At the door he stopped. Brenda's going to think you're punishing her. I'm enforcing a boundary I should have enforced 2 years ago. That's not punishment. That's just late. He left. I sat in the study for a long time after looking at my wife's photograph on the desk. She'd been the kind of person who gave generously, but never confused generosity with obligation. I thought she'd understand. I hoped she'd understand. Monday came with a cold front moving in from the northwest. The process server arrived at 10:15 while I was in the workshop. I heard the knock on the front door, heard Brenda's voice, then silence. When I came inside an hour later, the notice was on the kitchen counter. Already opened. Already read. Brenda was in the living room with her arms folded. Her mother sat in the armchair I'd bought in 2003. Daniel stood by the window. This is a legal document, Brenda said when she saw me. Her voice was controlled, but barely. You actually went and hired an attorney. Yes, against your own son. Against occupants of my property who moved an additional person in without my knowledge or consent. She's my mother. She's a stranger who was in my bed when I came home from my brother's funeral. That landed. Even Brenda went quiet for a moment. We have nowhere to go, she said finally, less certain now. You have 30 days to find somewhere. I'll help in whatever way I reasonably can. I'll give you a reference. Help with first month's deposit. What I won't do is give you my house indefinitely. Patricia watched all of this from the armchair without speaking. I felt some sympathy for her. She was a woman in her late 60s, who'd been placed in an awkward position by her daughter's decisions. But sympathy and legality were two different things, and I'd learned the difference the hard way. That afternoon, Brenda called her sister in Memphis. I heard the conversation through the kitchen wall, not listening deliberately, just present in my own home. She was crying, and her version of events bore only a passing resemblance to what had actually happened. But I understood. People in pain tell the story that makes the pain make sense. That evening my phone started receiving calls from numbers I didn't recognize. A cousin of Brenda's. A woman from their church. Someone who introduced herself as a family friend and said she hoped I'd reconsider. I thanked each of them politely and ended the call. Daniel knocked on my bedroom door at 9. People are calling me too, he said. Your side of the family. Margaret. Apparently told someone. I didn't ask her to. I know. He leaned against the doorframe. He looked older than 40 right then. Dad, I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to take your house. I never was. Things just got complicated. And I handled it badly. You let your wife move her mother into my room while I was at a funeral. I know. Without calling me. Without asking. I know. He met my eyes. I didn't think you'd be back so soon. That was honest, at least. I appreciated the honesty, even while it confirmed everything. The notice stands, I said. But I meant what I said. About helping. You find a place, I'll help with the deposit. You need more time than 30 days. You talk to me directly. Not through Brenda. Not through a cousin. Directly. He nodded. Went back down the hallway. I called Margaret. How are you holding up? She asked. Managing. I paused. Robert Ashby. Is he good? Best property attorney in Brentwood. Why? They're not going to leave quietly. I can feel it. She was right. 3 days later, I received a letter from an attorney named Gary Pollock, whose office was in a strip mall on Nolensville Pike. The letter accused me of creating a hostile living environment, claimed that evicting a senior citizen in winter constituted elder abuse under Tennessee statute, and suggested that my actions were designed to destroy my son's marriage. The letter used the word vindictive 4 times. I photographed it and sent the image to Robert Ashby. His response came within the hour. 1 sentence. This is a delay tactic. Do nothing. I did nothing. On day 12 of the notice period, the internet went out. I was the account holder. I had called the provider the previous week and scheduled disconnection effective that date. I'd also called the cable company. Both were services I paid for, both in my name, both within my right to cancel. The electric and water I left on. Heat in November was not something I was willing to weaponize. Daniel appeared in the workshop 20 minutes after the router went dark. You killed the internet. I canceled my service. You're welcome to set up your own account. Brenda works from home. Then she'll want to get that arranged quickly. I looked up from the workbench. Daniel, find a house. I will help you do it. But this can't continue. He stood there for a long moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected. I don't want to lose you, Dad. I set down the tool in my hand. You're not losing me. You're losing my house. Those aren't the same thing. He left without another word. But that evening, I heard him on the phone in the kitchen, and this time, he was talking to a realtor. Margaret called the next day and asked if I wanted to have lunch. We met at a diner on Hillsborough Pike that we'd been going to since the late 90s, Margaret and Carol and I, every few months when schedules aligned. The booth by the window, the same waitress for 15 years. Though I'd long since stopped knowing her name, Margaret slid into the booth across from me. She was 61, silver-haired, with the particular competence of someone who had spent decades doing unglamorous work with precision and without complaint. She had brought Carol's rosary to the hospital in the final days and left it in my hands without a word. That was the kind of person she was. You look terrible, she said. Thank you. She ordered coffee for both of us without asking, which was also the kind of person she was. How's the house situation? They're looking at rentals. Brenda is furious. Daniel is embarrassed. Patricia mostly watches television and doesn't say much. And you? I'm sleeping in my own bed, which is an improvement. She smiled. Tom, can I say something as Carol's friend and not as someone connected to your attorney? Go ahead. You're doing the right thing, and I know that doesn't make it feel better. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Carol used to say, you had a hard time asking for what you needed. Said you'd give everything and then be surprised when people took it. That was accurate enough to sting. She also said, Margaret continued, that when you finally did draw a line, nobody could move you. That the hard part was getting you to the line. I met the line. I can see that. She looked at me steadily. Don't let them pull you back from it. Not because you're angry, which you have every right to be, but because the line is correct. It was always correct. We sat for a while after the food came. Outside, the November rain had started in earnest, sheeting down the window in long silver lines. I watched a couple share an umbrella on the sidewalk, running for a car, laughing about something. She's been gone 12 years, I said. I know. I keep thinking she'd tell me I'm being too hard on Daniel. Margaret shook her head slowly. She'd tell you Daniel is almost 41 years old and needs to solve his own problems. She was a practical woman, Tom. More than people gave her credit for. That was true. Carol had been the most practical person I'd ever known, which had been easy to miss because she was also warm, and warmth is what people remember. But she had been the one who kept the finances organized, who spotted the structural problem in a contractor's proposal before I did, who looked at a situation and said clearly what needed to happen without dressing it up in sentiment. I missed her for a long time after that lunch. Quietly and specifically. The way you miss a particular tool that you've worked with so long, your hand knows its weight. On day 24 of the notice period, Daniel found a rental house in Antioch. 3 bedrooms, a garage, good school district for whenever the kids they kept planning for arrived. He came to the workshop and told me about it with the careful tone of someone trying not to seem like they needed approval. That's a good area, I said. Yeah. He looked around the workshop, at the pegboard tools, the workbench where he'd sat doing homework as a teenager while I built things beside him. We can be out by the 28th. That's 2 days before the deadline. I know. He picked up a hand plane from the bench, turned it over the way he used to as a boy when I was explaining how something worked. Dad, the deposit is $1,200. We don't have it liquid right now. I looked at my son, 40 years old, too proud to ask directly, asking sideways the way I'd taught him not to. I'd taught him that. Or rather, I'd modeled it for so long he'd absorbed it like a language. I'll write the check, I said. You don't have to. I know I don't. I'm choosing to. I went to the small desk in the corner of the workshop, pulled out the checkbook I kept there for supply orders, wrote it out, handed it to him. This is separate from the house. You understand? This is me helping my son move into a decent place. It's not related to what happened. He took the check, looked at it for a moment. I should have called you, he said. When Brenda's mother needed a place, I should have called and asked. Yes, I was afraid you'd say no. I might have. Yeah. He folded the check and put it in his shirt pocket. I think that's what I was afraid of, that you'd say no and I'd have to tell Brenda, and she'd. He stopped. That's not an excuse. No, it isn't. It's an explanation. I leaned against the workbench. Outside the workshop window, the backyard cedars were losing the last of their color in the late November light. I'd planted those trees the year Daniel was born. An explanation is fine, I said. It doesn't change what happened. But it's something. The moving truck came on the 27th. Patricia left with Brenda in the silver sedan, headed for a sister's house in Clarksville. Daniel made 2 trips in his truck. By 4 in the afternoon, the house was mine again. The guest room had a rectangle of lighter paint on the wall where they'd hung something. The kitchen smelled different. The spice rack rearranged. A coffee maker I didn't own sitting on the counter. I walked through each room. Slowly. Deliberately. The master bedroom was unchanged, which surprised me. I'd expected something wrong, something moved or missing. But everything was, as it had been. My nightstand, my books, my wife's photograph on the dresser. I stood in the doorway for a moment, understanding why nothing was wrong in here. Because this was the room they'd taken for Patricia. And Patricia had apparently been a careful guest even if nobody had asked her permission to install her there. On the kitchen counter, a folded piece of paper, Daniel's handwriting, bigger and sloppier than mine. Dad, I'm sorry for how this went. Not for needing help. I'll need that sometimes, and I hope you know it goes both ways. But for the way we handled it. You deserved better than coming home to what you came home to. I hope we get to the other side of this at some point. I think we will. D. I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket. Margaret called at 6. They're gone? Yes. How does it feel? I looked around the kitchen. The quiet of a house with only one person in it. I'd lived alone before, in the years after Carol died, before Daniel came back to Nashville. I'd thought I'd forgotten how it felt. Bigger, I said. It feels bigger. That'll pass, she said. Tom. Robert sent over the final paperwork. Everything is cleared. No counterfiling. They dropped the elder abuse claim. Gary Pollock apparently had a reality check. A pause. Are you going to be all right over there? I thought about the cedar trees in the backyard. The workshop. The porch I'd built from reclaimed wood, where Carol and I had spent every summer evening the weather allowed. The filing cabinet with 32 years of documents bearing my name at the top of every page. I'm going to be fine, I said. We talked for another hour. About Carol. About the early years. About a funny story involving a camping trip Daniel had hated as a child and pretended to love. At some point, Margaret laughed at something I said, and I realized she had a good laugh, the kind that doesn't perform itself, just arrives and fills whatever space it's in. You're good company, I said. I've been told. I don't say that lightly. A brief pause. I know you don't. Her voice was warmer now. Less the practical friend of a practical woman. More just herself. Tom, would you like to have dinner sometime? Not at the diner. Somewhere better. I considered that for a moment. The house settling around me. The cedar trees darkening in the backyard. The workshop light still on through the window. I would, I said, I really would. We went to dinner on a Friday in December. A restaurant on the east side she liked. The kind of place with no printed menu and candles on the table and a wine list you had to ask about. I wore the blazer I'd bought for Daniel's wedding and hadn't put on since. Margaret wore something dark blue. A color that suited her in the way some colors suit certain people completely. We talked about architecture. I hadn't talked about architecture with someone interested in it in years. She asked about the Victorian building where her law firm worked, whether I could tell what the original floor plan had been. I told her about the way builders in that era thought about light, how every room was designed to have morning sun or afternoon sun depending on its purpose. She listened the way people listen when they're actually interested, not waiting for their turn but genuinely there. Carol used to say I talked too much about buildings, I said. Carol was wrong about that. She picked up her wine glass. I want to ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business. Go ahead. How long has it been since someone looked after you? The question surprised me, not in a bad way. What do you mean? I mean took care of you. Not the reverse. I thought about it honestly. The answer, honestly, was longer than I wanted to say out loud. Carol did, I said. When she was alive. Then after she died, I was the one doing the taking care of, mostly. Daniel needed it. The house needed it. Seemed like the right role. It became the only role. Yes. She set her glass down carefully. That's a long time to only go in one direction. We left the restaurant at 9. The December air was cold and clean. The street was quiet. Holiday lights in the windows of the storefronts. She'd driven herself, which I'd expected, and her car was half a block from mine in the lot on the corner. At her car, she stopped and turned. I'm glad you called Robert, she said. Not just for the legal situation. I think you needed to fight for something that was yours. I've been thinking about that. And I think you're right. And I think I waited too long. I held her gaze in the cold air. About more than just the house, she smiled. Just that. And it was enough. I drove home on the interstate. The city lights spread out below me as I came over the hill, Nashville glittering in the dark valley. I took the Birchwood exit, wound through the quiet streets, turned into my own driveway. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. The house was dark except for the porch light I'd left on. The cedar trees stood in the yard, black against the sky, the ones I'd planted in the year my son was born. Everything I owned, every year of work, every deliberate choice, was inside that structure. My name, on every piece of paper that mattered. It had never stopped being mine. I got out of the car, went inside, turned on the kitchen light, made coffee, poured a cup, took it to the porch. The cedar boards were cold under my feet. I could see my breath. Down the street, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the dark, then going quiet. 3 days ago, Robert Ashby had sent the final confirmation. Case dismissed. No counterclaim. The house was mine, in fact, as well as in law, which was how it had always been. But sometimes you need the paperwork to make the reality solid. I thought about Daniel's note. still folded in the desk drawer where I'd put it. I'd call him before Christmas. Not to smooth things over entirely, some things didn't smooth, but because he was my son and the tree was taller than the branch, or something like that, the kind of thing my own father used to say, and that I'd never understood. Until now. I'd fight for what was mine, and I'd learned, somewhere in the last 30 days, that what was mine included more than a house. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Thank you for tonight. Same time next week? I looked at the message for a moment in the cold dark. The coffee cup warm in my other hand. The cedar boards solid under my feet. Same time next week? I wrote back. Somewhere better than last time. Her response was immediate. You're on. I put the phone in my pocket and stood there a while longer, looking at my street, my yard, the house that bore my name. The night was very quiet. Somewhere, the dog had stopped barking. The cedar trees stood the way they always had, the way they would stand long after I was done with all of this patient and permanent and rooted clean through to the ground. I went inside and locked my door. If you found value in this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. I read every one. To hear the next story, click on the box to your left. Thank you for being here.